Iran is sitting at a negotiating table. Its missile stockpiles are degraded, its proxies are broken, its supreme leader is dead. And yet, right now, Iranian naval forces are issuing direct warnings to oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, telling them which routes they're allowed to take or face what Tehran calls an immediate and forceful response. That's not the posture of a defeated nation. That's a nation still trying to control one of the most strategically critical choke points on Earth. Here's the thing. President Trump went on record this week saying Iran has agreed to just about everything the United States needs. He said he defeated them militarily. He said they still have some missiles left, but that the United States could wipe those out too. That's a confident statement, and maybe it's accurate on the battlefield. But here's the gap between doctrine and reality that I want you to pay attention to. Military defeat and strategic leverage are two different things. You can destroy a country's air defenses, degrade its ballistic missile inventory, and kill its proxies, and that country can still make global commerce significantly more expensive just by issuing a statement about shipping lanes. Iran just did exactly that. Iran's military command issued a formal warning to tanker operators in the Strait of Hormuz. Any vessel that fails to comply with designated routes or disregards navigation protocols set by the Islamic Republic will face what they called immediate and forceful response from armed forces. They said the security of the violating vessel would be endangered. Now, that's not a casual comment. That's a coordinated signal, and it was sent while nuclear negotiations are still ongoing. Former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman put it plainly, this is not the free flow of commerce. And I want you to sit with that for a second. Roughly 20% of global oil supply transits the Strait of Hormuz. Every tanker captain in that region just received a message from a government that still has mines, fast attack boats, and drone capabilities in those waters. That's leverage. Degraded leverage, but leverage. Here's what Hoffman said that I think is getting buried in the broader coverage. Iran does not actually want to close the strait entirely. They can't afford to. The United States recently lifted the oil blockade as part of the diplomatic process, which means Iran is now selling oil again, and that revenue flows directly into the IRGC. Hoffman's concern, and it's a serious one, is that the IRGC will use that income to rearm, to reconstitute ballistic missile stockpiles, to rebuild drone production capacity, the same capabilities that were degraded over the last several months. So the United States essentially gave Iran breathing room to negotiate, and Iran is using that breathing room to signal that it still intends to manage the strait on its own terms. Now watch what happens strategically when you map that out. If Iran can establish a precedent that tankers must follow IRGC-approved routes through the strait, even without firing a single shot, they've achieved a form of operational control. Not military control, not legal control, but behavioral control. Shipping companies, insurers, and flag states start routing around Iranian preferences because the downside risk isn't worth it. That's a quiet but decisive shift in who actually governs that waterway. Hoffman was asked directly what a U.S. military operation to retake control of the strait would look like if diplomacy fails. His answer was careful but clear. It would be economically costly. The United States destroyed a large percentage of Iran's missiles and drones, but Iran still retains what he called mosquito fleet capabilities, meaning fast attack craft, sea mines, and short-range drones. These are not precision strategic systems. They're harassment platforms. But in a confined waterway like the Strait of Hormuz, which at its narrowest point is only about 21 nautical miles wide, harassment platforms can shut down traffic, spike insurance premiums, and reroute global energy markets within hours. A full U.S. military operation to establish persistent control of the strait would require clearing mines, neutralizing fast boat squadrons, establishing air superiority over the Persian Gulf approaches, and maintaining a presence that deters re-engagement. That's not a strike. That's a sustained campaign, and Hoffman flagged what the president is actually weighing right now. Midterm elections are approaching. The global economy is sensitive. A military escalation that triggers oil price spikes is a political cost that lands directly at home. So Trump was briefed on military options this week and chose to let diplomacy continue. That's the decision, and it's not necessarily the wrong one, but the context matters. Iran's negotiating position is weaker than it was 6 months ago. Their air defenses are degraded. Their missile inventory is reduced. Their proxy network across the region has been largely dismantled. And yet, they are still issuing navigation orders to international shipping. That tells you something about how Tehran reads this moment. They believe they retain enough residual capability to stay relevant in the conversation, even from a position of military weakness. Here's what you're probably not hearing in most of the coverage. The Strait of Hormuz question and the nuclear question are not the same negotiation. There were indirect talks held in Doha this week. According to Hoffman, those discussions did not specifically address the nuclear program. They were broader diplomatic contact. The nuclear file, the ballistic missile program, and Tehran's support for proxy groups are all separate levers, and they don't all move at the same speed. You can get an agreement in principle on one and still be deadlocked on the others. Iran knows this. The IRGC negotiates differently than the foreign ministry. And what the IRGC wants, which is revenue, operational space, and regional influence, doesn't necessarily align with what a foreign minister signs. The timing of all of this is also significant. Hoffman noted that the period from July 4th through July 9th is constrained by the funeral of Supreme Leader Khamenei. Major decisions on both sides are unlikely before that process concludes. The Iranian political transition is still unfolding. Whoever consolidates power in Tehran over the next several weeks will define whether these negotiations produce something durable or collapse into the same cycle of engagement and provocation that defined the JCPOA era. And that's the broader strategic question. Trump has been explicit that he wants something better than the JCPOA. He's right that the original deal had structural problems. It did not address ballistic missiles. It did not constrain proxy activity. It had sunset clauses that essentially gave Iran a patient pathway to nuclear capability. If the current negotiation produces a deal with those same gaps, it won't hold. Hoffman said Trump will be held accountable for delivering something better. That's the standard, and the Strait of Hormuz navigation warnings, issued during active negotiations, are Iran's way of reminding everyone at the table that they still have cards to play. Degraded cards. But cards. That's what makes this moment genuinely complicated. Military operations succeeded. Capabilities were destroyed. The battlefield calculus shifted hard against Iran. And yet the strait is still a pressure point. Iran is still at the table on its own terms. And the economic cost of forcing a total resolution militarily is high enough that the United States is choosing negotiation over a finishing blow. That is not weakness. That's a calculated restraint. But it does mean this is not over, and anyone framing it as a clean military victory followed by a clean diplomatic resolution is getting ahead of the facts. The question going forward is whether the deal that emerges actually closes the gaps that the JCPOA left open. If it doesn't address missiles, it's incomplete. If it doesn't address proxy funding, it's incomplete. And if Iran retains enough straight leverage to enforce its own navigation rules while negotiations continue, the strategic picture is more complicated than any single press conference makes it sound. Stay with Military Fox as this develops. Subscribe so you don't miss the breakdown when the next round of talks produces something concrete or falls apart entirely. And if you want to understand the Strait of Hormuz in depth, the geography, the forced dispositions, the mine threat, and what a real naval campaign there would require, that breakdown is already in the library. I'm Bradley Fox. This is Military Fox.